This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. And I am your host, Darren McKee. With me today is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Hope you're all doing well. We have one segment for you today. I, Darren, am going to give you a bit of an overview of a human augmentation report put out by the UK. So in May 2021, the UK Department of Defence put out a report on human augmentation. It's about a 100-page report, and I'm going to try to give you a summary and some excerpts that I thought were interesting. Putting some qualifiers first, they put out a disclaimer, and this is a quote, "The content of this publication does not represent the official policy or strategy of the UK government or that of the UK's Ministry of Defence. Furthermore, the analysis and findings do not represent the official policy or strategy of the countries contributing to the project. It does, however, represent the view of the Development Concepts and Doctrine Centre, a department within the UK Ministry of Defence, and the Bundeswehr Office for Defence Planning, a department within the German Federal Ministry of Defence. They combined knowledge and wisdom from various subject matter experts. Basically, here's a bunch of ideas, we stand by it, but the broader notion of we don't stand by it."
Okay.
It is a strategic implications project to see how the field of human augmentation will change over the next 30 years and how it will impact defense.
Okay.
As we know, we like to know what the methods are. So they used a scenario-based approach to explore implications out to about 2050. So what that means is they have an initial analysis of what might be influencing a system and doing some investigation. They identify main drivers of change, how things might be disrupted, different risks, different dependencies, different key factors. Then they use these to construct a range of future scenarios to explore possible societal, technological, economic, political, and military implications. Scenarios here are usually short, fictional sort of headlines from the future. This thing could happen. What would that do? Does this sound like it's reasonable given the time estimate? What are the key issues driving this? What are the implications of this type of scenario? And then they sort of looked at that and thought, well, what are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats that come from such a scenario if it came to be? Okay. So then that's where it sort of links to what they might actually do in terms of work, in terms of defense policy. So it is called Human Augmentation, the Dawn of a New Paradigm, which is not that bad for a government report, as a fancy title goes. And as listeners know, it's important to me that we know what our terms mean. So, quote, "This publication proposes a definition for human augmentation as the application of science and technologies to temporarily or permanently improve human performance." That seems straightforward. Continuing with the quote, "This field can be further divided into human performance optimization and human performance enhancement. So the human performance optimization is the use of science and technologies that improve human performance up to the limit of biological potential without adding new capabilities, while human performance enhancement is the use of science and technologies to enhance human performance beyond the limit of biological capabilities. And that can include additional capabilities beyond those innate traits to humans, like if you could somehow give a human night vision."
Whoa. Cool.
The main argument of the report is that integrating the abilities of both people and machines will be critical to winning future wars. That seems to make sense. The old paradigm was having a human operate platforms, this is the broad sense of the term, like vehicles, aircraft, and ships to achieve military objectives. Yes. The future will shift to seeing the human as the platform. And this is going to be primarily made up of physical, psychological, and social needs and abilities. And these abilities can be augmented and enhanced.
Okay. Big assumption there.
Well, that's their business, right?
Yes.
You can see a different department saying, like, we're not going to do this at all. We're just going to keep building better ships. To provide a bit more detail, and I'm basically quoting here, "The physical performance is the capability to affect the physical environment and move within it. Strength, dexterity, speed, and endurance are all components, and there is often a trade-off between them. While the psychological performance comprises cognition, emotion, and motivation, and the social performance is the ability to perceive oneself as part of a group and the readiness to act as part of a team." Yeah. Definitely important for military cohesion. As for why one should care about human augmentation, I mean, if you're a listener, you're like, why wouldn't someone care? Probably. But to make the case, first, well, there are already technologies and developments that require action today, either for existing things or to prepare for what will become. Another supporting argument the report makes is that, quote, "We cannot wait for the ethics of human augmentation to be decided for us. We must be part of the conversation now. The ethical implications are significant, but not insurmountable. Early and regular engagement will be essential to remain at the forefront of this field. Ethical perspectives on human augmentation will change, and this could happen quickly. There may be a moral obligation to augment people, particularly in cases where it promotes well-being or protects us from novel threats." So I think that's a pretty interesting issue that right now, something that seems unethical, doing some sort of augmentation to people, might in the future seem unethical if you didn't do it. You mean you could have removed the disease of that person before they were born and you didn't? That seems wrong.
Well, I guess it depends on what that augmentation is, right? Is it unethical to not make someone stronger? Whatever. Is it unethical to like avoid a disease or lengthen lifespan or improve quality of life in some fundamental way through some other metric?
Yes.
That's very different.
Totally. And my personal guess is that we'll first see the disease part as the things that are unethical, and then it'll shift a bit. And then perhaps even when other countries start doing the intelligence and strength parts, then you might have issues.
Yeah.
Back to the report is the idea that, well, the need to use human augmentation may ultimately be dictated by national interest. And here's a quote, countries may need to develop and use human augmentation or risk surrendering influence and prosperity and security to those who will. The future of human augmentation should not be decided by ethicists or public opinion, although both will be important voices. Rather, governments will need to develop a clear policy position that maximizes the use of human augmentation in support of prosperity, safety, and security without undermining our values.
So government thinks it should be a government decision, but if you ask those other people, I think they think it should be their decision too. That's generally how people are.
It sounds like a bunch of humans. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Governance in Western liberal societies and international institutions is already unable to keep pace with technological change, and adoption of human augmentation will exacerbate this trend. Again, I'm quoting, national and international governance will be challenged by the myriad of implications of adopting human augmentation technologies. This could lead to a new arms race and inter- and intra-state tensions if not carefully managed through early and regular dialogue.
Arms race like the arms in your body.
Yes, where you run a race on your arms and legs. I think that's what this technical report means.
That's very impressive.
So you'll notice a similar theme here, but I thought this part was worth highlighting. Cultural and ethical considerations will inform the extent to which opportunities are seized, but human augmentation threats will be forced upon us irrespective of our own normative standpoint. We must understand and address such threats, or otherwise risk creating a strategic vulnerability. Threats will emanate from states, terrorist groups, criminals, lone actors, or even malpractice in legitimate activities. Protecting ourselves will demand a level of scientific, ethical, and legal proficiency that outmatches the adversary. Mitigations may not involve human augmentation technology itself, but understanding the field and developing comprehensive policies and capabilities to protect society and individuals will be critical. So yes, this is a technical government report, but I'm trying to give you a sense of how this organization sees their work, and I think that makes a very reasonable claim, or they've made a very reasonable claim, especially from where they're coming from, in terms of like, well, you can think what you want, but once the threat starts coming in, we may have to respond in kind in some way.
Yeah.
Other key ideas are that human augmentation may lead to fundamentally new concepts of warfare. So in the next 30 years, increasing use of autonomous and unmanned systems, from the tactical to the strategic level, could significantly increase the combat effect that an individual can bring to bear. But to realize this potential, the interfaces between people and machines will need to be significantly enhanced. That's not too surprising. Human augmentation will play a key role in reducing the risk of cognitive load as warfare becomes faster, more complex, and more congested. And today's rehabilitation tools become tomorrow's enhancements.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it too, right? Like, these are it's like cybernetics. It's technologies that's made to help people who've lost limbs or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, sure, but you could also make a person strong enough to rip the door off a car. Like, okay, if that's what you want.
Maybe that is what you want, Adam.
Yeah.
Maybe that is. Well, so that's the high-level look at the report, but the report itself is broken down into chapters about actual human augmentation technologies, the ethical considerations, the legal considerations, the societal implications, and the implications for defense. I'll focus on the first part and discuss the Human Augmentation Technologies chapter. So, and then the report here highlights that they understand and are concerned about side effects and unintended outcomes. Like, that's a point. That's a good point. No point enhancing one ability if another one suffers a great loss. Additionally, the report argues that expensive augmentation resources shouldn't be leveraged to address problems that could be solved by simpler methods. Optimize what you can first. That's what I mentioned, the human optimization. So if someone doesn't sleep well, try to get them to sleep better. If someone isn't eating the right foods, have them eat a better diet. If someone's not exercising enough, do that. Like, there are lower hanging fruit that in military strategies could be utilized first before all the other stuff, right? They even have optimized hydration. Some people just don't drink enough water, right? There's also physical training, which we know people use, but cognitive training. There's a lot of things that be done mentally, not just, people getting smarter and learning, but how to manage themselves, their stress, and other types of situations.
Sure.
One example here is that the future of wearables may be involved here, where you could have increasingly accurate heart rate monitoring, earrings that measure body temperature and pulse, shoes that generate their own power to sense body weight and movement, contact lenses that analyze tears to predict your emotional state and project information, clothes that sense your physiology and give you small directional taps on your shoulders to provide screen-free global positioning system directions, and smart buttons and clothes that collectively understand your habits and inform other linked technologies, from a car to coffee machine, to optimize your life. I think it's later in the report, but they show like people do have light magnets implanted into their body, so they always know where north is. Right?
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so you can have this.
Have a sense for it.
Vibrate towards north. You're like, well, that helps if you're lost in somewhere. The report spent a chunk of time on 4 core human augmentation technologies, so I'll briefly talk about those. Genetic engineering, bioinformatics, brain interfaces, and pharmaceuticals. And these, of course, could improve our physiological, psychological, and social performance. Genetic engineering. Well, this refers to the modification of reproductive cells, germline cells, or the grown organism, which is the somatic modification. Germline modification affects all cells and is passed on to the next generation. This is largely prohibited at the moment by most governments, at least, for humans. Somatic modification affects only the target cells and those cells descended from them in the body. This limits the individual being treated, not passed on to the next generation. It's been around for some time, but of course, we've recently had some breakthroughs, like the molecular scissors of CRISPR, and this will enable more selective and targeted removal or replacement of genes that could augment humans in a wide range of ways. For example, already CRISPR is being used to cure an inherited disorder that leads to blindness. They also had this little explainer box in the report about a CRISPR controversy, which I think is worth reading in full. Quote, the most controversial use of CRISPR was in November 2018 when Chinese scientists, led by He Jiankui, used it for germline modification in human embryos to make them less susceptible to HIV. This procedure has still not been independently verified, but it nonetheless shocked the global scientific community amid concerns that the technology was too premature for use on humans, and that it needlessly risked the long-term health of 3 consequent babies and their offspring. As a result of the experiment, the researcher was jailed for 3 years for illegal medical malpractice, that's the quote, and the scientific community moved to establish a moratorium on further work in this area. Of note, the technique involved disabling a gene for a protein called CCR5, which, when deleted from mice in a separate study, was found to improve their cognitive abilities. This has led some to speculate that CRISPR may have already been used, possibly inadvertently, to enhance human traits.
So the goal was to make them resistant to HIV, and it might have made them smarter.
It might have done both.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
So there's a lot of mites. Once the world didn't react well to this whatsoever, China put him in jail. I think China probably knew what he was doing and then just reacted as a nation state might. I would also assume various countries, perhaps China's one of them, is probably pursuing these research methods, just not publicly. Well,
I think it's also interesting that usually an unintended side effect of a random genetic change would not be another positive thing. There'd
Correct.
be something bad that could happen. And this is why people want to be cautious. So it's lucky that it made you smarter and it didn't cause some terrible problem with your immune system or cause some cognitive deficiency.
Well, to be fair, it actually could do those other things too, somehow, right?
Yes.
It's we know things are very complicated. There's often multiple effects from genes.
Yeah.
Number 2, bioinformatics, and this is the term they give to the interdisciplinary field that applies computation and analysis tools to capture and interpret large sets of biological data. It's closely linked to collection analytics, but takes the science of understanding the human body to the next level, as they say in the report, by looking at molecular biology, macromolecular structures, and genomics. Another quote here, bioinformatics could be the key to understanding how pharmaceutical treatments differ between individuals, thereby laying the foundations for personalized medicine. Advances in artificial intelligence, as well as our understanding of the relationship between genotype and phenotype, genetics improves, the utility of bioinformatics is likely to accelerate. I very much think so. There's different terms about personalized versus individualized medicine. The idea is that, with large enough data, you can then get trends and have a better sense of how someone is and the best treatment for them. But truly personalized data, the only data would be you pretty much. I mean, it depends how you conceptualize what these things are. That if you're similar to this large group of people we have in different bins for our algorithms, we can then know more about you.
Yeah.
Which is not quite the same as we just have tons of data on you.
Yeah. You need the trend to be able to compare, to be able to do something useful with it.
Eventually, it could be if there is enough data on you, they will know what to do for you. But you don't want to do all the experiments on yourself to see what works. There'll still be some sort of link to this larger data structure, which is many, many, many other people.
Yes.
Number 3 is brain interfaces. And here's another quote. The science of decoding electroencephalogram signals, those are just brainwave being monitored on the outside of the skull, from the brain is advancing and could present huge opportunities to integrate the processing power of machines with the cognitive power of the human brain. Brain interfaces, also known as neural interfaces or brain-computer interfaces, BCI, enable direct communication between brain and computer. I mentioned this before when someone was able to, disabled individual was able to think letters which then would appear on the screen because it was trained up.
So this is human thought gets transferred to computer, not computer
Correct.
knowledge gets transferred back to human, which is
correct. We're not
significantly more complicated.
Yeah, we're not downloading Kung Fu yet.
Yeah. But you can just read the words off a screen.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, here it says there could be one way to understand brain function or two way. For example, to create a control and feedback system or a thought transfer system involving the donor brain computer receptor brain.
Wow.
Examples include a hearing aid, right? That's a pretty simple one way.
Sure.
Two-way interfaces are at a very early stage of development and have achieved only limited results in narrow laboratory conditions. The most advanced examples usually involve the ability to transfer information, like with animals, or limited thought-speech translation in people. So we'll see where this goes. They're just certainly aware of this because it seems to be a developing field. And the fourth one is pharmaceuticals. Well, of course, you've all heard of these. They're one of the oldest forms of manipulation. Caffeine and other substances have been used throughout history. And here's a quote. Pharmaceuticals that enhance physical performance includes anabolic steroids, which stimulate muscle growth, although they can have unpleasant or even deadly side effects. Creatine has been proven to deliver increased power output and fatigue resistance, while at the same time it increases the risk of being overweight and injury. They do a couple other these, like with proteins and hormones. The main thing is that you can have impressive gains in various performance, but there are side effects which have to be carefully controlled and monitored because there could be blood clotting, stroke, death, and so on. Meldonium is a drug legally prescribed to treat coronary artery disease, but has been used by athletes and apparently by Soviet soldiers in the 1979 Afghan War to enhance physical performance. But of course, again, nausea, headaches, dizziness. It's almost like at this stage, not much comes for free, right?
No.
So beyond these core technologies, the report also mentions exoskeletons.
Ooh.
Yeah. And they come in a variety of types, apparently. So there's an unpowered exoskeleton, which goes into the passive sense, and these can just support able-bodied users' musculoskeletal movements to improve ability to manipulate heavy tools and reduce chronic and occupational injuries.
Interesting.
Then there's powered non-invasive. So this is fully powered suit that gives the users normal movement to deliver super strength or increased endurance. Mm-hmm. And such suits have industrial or military logistics applications where heavy carriage is required, not for combat. And then there's also powered semi-invasive. And here you could imagine a world like the University of Grenoble enabled a paralyzed patient to walk again by using 2 wireless implants to interpret brain signals into robotic movements.
That's great.
The device was suspended from the ceiling to assist with balance, but further user training and suit refinement will aim to remove this requirement. Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff. Next in the report, they talk about sensory augmentation, basically enhancing your sensory abilities, like wearing better glasses from the joke at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Here's a quote. Information can be collected through a combination of sensors mounted or implanted on the body. The senses can be extended by translating frequencies beyond the normal human range into frequencies that can be seen, heard, or otherwise detected. This could allow the user to see through walls, sense vibrations, and detect airborne chemicals and changes to magnetic fields. More invasive options to enhance existing senses have also been demonstrated, for example, coating retinal cells with nanoparticles to enable vision in the infrared spectrum. Somewhat related to this is the technology they describe as cross-reality, which they use as a catch-all for virtual reality, mixed reality, and augmented reality.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So here's some examples they give of cross-reality in the military. The UK's Royal Navy is working with industry to develop an augmented reality system that could enable ships to be operated from the land. It is also trialing augmented reality glasses on the bridge of its frigates to improve situational awareness, increase efficiency, and mitigate adverse environmental conditions.
Yeah.
The augmented reality systems in warfare could include overlaid information on friendly, enemy, and civilian locations, geography, and weapon engagement zones. This enhanced understanding could improve the speed and quality of decision-making, as well as the application of military capability. Of course.
So it's like your HUD or something like that. Like it's really,
yes.
It's really the powers of a good UI. Right?
Yeah, heads-up display for those who are not as geeked out as Adam. Yes. My overview of this report isn't intended to be exhaustive at any level, but I did want to mention some of the things that they briefly discuss, these linked technologies. So, quote, The potential of human augmentation is significantly enhanced when used in combination with other fields of science. Often mentioned in this context is nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science. They give it the acronym NBIC, or initialism. This refers to the expected synergy of advancements in these 4 fields of technology. They then briefly talk about AI, nanotech, and 3D printing. All right, so all that leads up to a feasibility assessment. And they actually have quite a nice little graph and chart here. Now, you can't see this graph and chart, of course, dear listener, but they have 11 different science and technologies. So you have genetics, germline, genetics somatoline, gut microbiome, invasive brain interfaces, non-invasive brain interfaces, passive exoskeletons, pharmaceuticals, powered exoskeletons, optimization methods, and they also talk about bioinformatics and collection and analytics. All the things I kind of just talked about. They have a circle representing these in terms of whether they're low or high in terms of technological maturity, and then in a matrix, 2 by 2, about whether there's something that should be adopted or not, in the broad sense of the word. Mm-hmm. So like, should you identify opportunities to integrate now? Should you monitor? Should you understand and be prepared to seize opportunities? So I just want to say, this is, maybe boring technical government stuff, but I think this is a very useful way to demonstrate, okay, what are we already thinking we should do now? Like pharmaceuticals, the powered exoskeleton, optimization methods, sleep and eating, whatnot, and collections and analytics. Monitor is the passive exoskeletons, right? And then understood and be prepared to seize opportunities is like almost the rest of them. The genetics, the invasive brain interfaces, the bioinformatics. So again, if they weren't thinking this way, one might be concerned for one's military in terms of what they're doing. But of course, this is where some of the research is going to go. So it's tempting to discuss the legal and ethical and societal implications, but this is going to make this long segment even much longer. So I'll just suggest you read them if you're curious. As for the defense implications, I'm just going to mention a few, because it is a defense report. Well, in recruiting, this is the basics, right? Entry standards and screening processes will need to account for an expected increase in the use of human augmentation within society. So do you have to raise your standards because there's going to be more augmented humans? Maybe people get through if they're augmented, but then they might have, some negative side effects from how they've augmented themselves. In bioinformatics, this will identify an individual's strengths and weaknesses and is likely to change the way defense recruits in general. Genetic profiling is a relatively cheap and effective way of identifying individual traits, and apparently Russia has already announced a plan to use it for military personnel. So why I like reports like this is sometimes we're like, who's going to use genetic profiling? Like, well, here's a report that comes out and says it's a good idea and it's already happening.
Yes.
Neural monitoring, everyone's dream. Neural monitoring and neural stimulation technologies have the potential to radically improve training, including specialist areas such as pilot, specialist forces, and language training. In the future, brain interfaces could be used not just to monitor, but also to enhance training by precisely stimulating the areas of the brain relevant to the task.
Okay.
Now, that
so
would
you're not
help
learning it through stimulation, but maybe it's stimulating your brain so that you're in sort of a mindset where you're more apt to learn it. Is that the idea there?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but we know from basic neuroscience that anytime you kind of do anything, your brain responds.
Yes.
And if you are learning a task over years, mechanical, otherwise, your brain literally rewires to then show or demonstrate a capability in that domain. Like that's literally your brain. The line is, if things fire together, the neurons, they wire together. So over time, you build up a capability, and that capability has to be represented in your neural structure.
Yes.
So in theory, you could have some sort of training educational environment simulated.
Yes.
You could imagine externally bombarding your senses, which helps train your brain. But I think what they're saying is like, well, why don't you just go into the brain itself and somewhat mirror what that process is to just get the accelerated learning in the first place.
Well, we're a few steps away from that, I think.
We certainly are.
We can conceptualize it.
We are a few steps away, but it's not going to be impossible with this century, right?
No.
Yeah.
We just wait till we're uploading and snip a few things here and there. And
We'll just download the program, yes, or transfer, I guess, the program. What does it even mean to learn how to do something as an upload? Unit cohesion. Well, this is founded on social relationships, shared experience, and training. Yeah. It's a critical part of the willingness to fight. Human augmentation has the potential to change the foundations of unit cohesion, but differing levels of augmentation within units could introduce stigma, suspicion, or resentment of enhanced personnel. locker room jokes aside about people resenting enhanced personnel, you could imagine where some capabilities are much more developed in some individuals that it'll be hard for people to relate to them, or again, the jealousy would kick in.
Yeah. Well, it depends if that capability has a bearing on their day-to-day interactions. So if you're affecting someone mentally, or if you're affecting someone's social world, then yes, that might cause a stigma. But if I know someone's super strong or super healthy in some way, I might not really care as far as they are to a person I interact with. Right?
Yeah, if you're on the same team, you kind of just respect them. But if someone's staggeringly smarter than you, you might feel it's hard to talk to them.
Yes.
Or like, oh, they can hear things I can't. Like literally my subvocal speech, like what I'm not saying they can read your mind. That'd be a bit much at this stage, but people don't like not knowing what someone else is capable of doing.
Yeah. Well, your heart rate's elevated. You feeling okay? Well, now it's really elevated.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now you seem even more stressed out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, your blood flow just got redirected. Yeah. So another one is demobilization. And I think, of course, it's wise for the military to think about such things. So in addition to preparing personnel for operations, they will need to be prepared for life after the military. And you can imagine, as I say, this is a quote, for example, the use of invasive human augmentation may require surgery to remove or downgrade implants that may not be permitted in civilian life.
Oh,
Reintegration to society could be complicated from a technical perspective, but learning to live without military-grade augmentations could present even bigger mental health challenges. Preparing to de-augment will be just as important as augmenting in the first place. Equally, veterans who have benefited from human augmentation in service life may be highly sought after by civilian employers. That's a very interesting point. I mean, we already know that many service members have trouble reintegrating to society for, I think, a lot of good reasons. But you could imagine if you got to be super strong or smart, then it's just taken away, and you go back to civilian life. It's like a double loss of identity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or, this is just more in the realm of science fiction. Ghost in the Shell talks about stuff like this. Like, you're upgraded, and your body requires, like, very expensive upkeep. So it's like, great, you can like remain part of this paramilitary organization and they will fund you and indefinitely, but like you can't leave because you can't afford to keep your body up to date, right? So that's further out, obviously.
It's also like to what extent do parts of you become government owned property?
Yeah.
Like as a military person, in a way, you are government property, but this is really pushing that, like in a physical hardware sense, right?
Yeah. At one point, at least today's modern society respects that a person has sort of like bodily autonomy enough that they can say, I am leaving a job and I'm going. And maybe there's some NDAs or things like that they can't share, but like you're allowed to take your body with you. If that ever changed, surely there would be resistance to that, but it's not unfeasible. Right?
Yes. So basically overall, in summation here, I thought it was a good report. Hopefully it wasn't too dry for you, the listeners, but I think it's useful to cover such things to kind of do a deeper dive once in a while about what people in certain industries or government departments are thinking about when they try to implement future technologies. I partly thought that it wasn't that future-oriented enough, but I've learned you have to meet people where they are, and because many people aren't aware of the things that are already happening in 2021 or the past couple of years, to say like, oh, this thing might happen in 2030, 2040, it's too far. They can't get there mentally. No. And sometimes these futuristic reports are just trying to nudge people to keep up with the present.
Yeah.
Now this, they go to they say 30 years, 2050, and like, almost everything they've discussed, I think is entirely plausible. They do have a timeline chart, but I personally think things are going to move so fast by 2030, 2040, a lot of this stuff will be in place. So even though I think in a way it wasn't future oriented enough, largely what they're trying to do with this is to make augmentation technologies that are plausible within their time frame more mentally plausible.
Yeah.
So it's not just whether this thing could happen, but opening up someone's mind to think like, oh yeah, that could happen, and what might that change? And often sensitizing people to ideas takes repeated encounters. So that was the report. And just one last thing before I go and see if Adam has thoughts. They had two terms that I hadn't heard before. They had a black swan, which I have heard of, right? We know metaphor, high impact, low probability event that's difficult to predict, highly unlikely or improbable. But they also had black elephant, which is a metaphor that describes events that are forecasted to have high impact, but for various reasons they are unaddressed. And I think that's kind of funny. Maybe the elephant in the room type thing.
So like it doesn't...
kind of, you can imagine government. Everyone knows there's a problem, but there may be structural reasons why it's not addressed.
We can't prevent it. Oh, it's not like something we foresee that just doesn't happen.
No, it's forecasted to have an impact, but for various reasons, people just don't do anything about it. Like, everyone thinks it might be a high impact thing. I think that's a good term because it's like, oh, this is the thing. We should do it. Like, well, collective action, different incentives.
Yeah.
Why doesn't someone do something about it? And the other one was black jellyfish. Again, never heard this term before. Describes insignificant things that may escalate into high impact events through the phenomenon of positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So just introducing some new terms into your lexicon. I don't know if you're going to use them because who else would know them, but in case you hear, there's a black elephant event. You're like, oh, the thing that we already know about that no one's doing anything about?
Well, even if I don't use the term or remember the term, just understanding the concept sort of makes me reconceptualize the way I think about some things so that I could have value for sure.
Yes, and that's sometimes the value here, that the concepts are interesting enough to discuss.
Mm-hmm. I find this all very fascinating. One thing I think about a lot is like, I watch superhero movies and I play a lot of video games and things like that. And some of the things they always sort of express as big game changers are like, they wouldn't be that useful in the real world. Like if you took a military and you made everyone like as strong as some of like the strongest people, it wouldn't really give them that much of an advantage if the other guy's got like a slightly better gun or rocket, right? So like,
yes, the flesh is still weak in a being able to be killed sense.
Yeah, so like even if you had a bunch of Captain Americas or Spider-Mans running around the army, it probably wouldn't matter, right? But it's cool because in the stories we see, it's hand to hand and it's always on the ground and it's different than the real world. So probably if you could introduce any of these like 500 years ago to give someone a huge advantage. But today, it's probably more about the social, the intelligence-based, the interactions with technologies, right? We're talking about these displays and things like that. So I think that's maybe more where it's going to come from than like, okay, we made a guy stronger. Well, unless he's like Superman strong, it's probably not going to make a big difference in the
oh
fights,
no,
right?
the tank, which we don't use anymore, is stuck in the mud. Let me just move it.
Yeah. So yeah, like I mentioned, ripping doors off of cars. Like we're not close to that.
So you can imagine like perhaps firefighters or paramedics.
Yes.
And they'll maybe firefighters like, oh, you literally have to carry someone out of something once in a while.
Police,
maybe.
yes.
Yeah. But actual military, I think you're right. The hand-to-hand combat is glamorized in movies because it's interesting in that way, but it's not, doesn't make up that much part of the battlefield.
Sure. Good example. Like if everyone all of a sudden had like expert top level martial arts training in an army, I don't think that army would like all of a sudden just win all their wars because they would still get shot while they're trying to run at the guy. Like it's
or stabbed. Yes.
So
that sounds like the plot of a movie. But then there's like a EMP which disables all electronics, and therefore people have to do hand-to-hand combat.
Oh, and now we're fighting. Yeah, and I mean same thing for sort of personal, right? Like I lift weights and stuff like that, and being slightly stronger does not change my life at all. It's like, oh, maybe I'll be able to carry an extra grocery bag, right? Like this doesn't give me a practical advantage in day-to-day life unless you work in construction or you're a bouncer or you're a police officer or a firefighter or something. So the things people want aren't always like the most useful.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah. So you're better able to pick up your 3 kittens.
Yeah.
I was actually one of the strongest men. He's like, it's not great. I mean, people always ask you to move, help them move. Like, you're like, what do you do with like the world's strongest man? What do they do in the off season? Do they need to move the concrete blocks around? Not really, right? They just eat a lot.
Yeah. So in the realm of athletics, being a peak athlete is good because you're competing in the world of athletics against other athletes. But at the end of the day, it's not going to help you vacuum or do the dishes.
Well, maybe you have to lift up the couch, do the vacuuming, Adam.
Exactly. I dream of Genie like magically lifting things to clean under, right?
Well, until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
This is a disclaimer. This is a quote. The content of this publication, I'm sorry, not to do a stupid voice for that. Sorry.